Greetings, friends. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life with me, the Reverend Jamie Franklin, on this new episode of Irreverend. And as always, I am delighted to say that I'm joined by my very, very great friend and confidant, pushing back against the darkness together, engaged in righteous retaliation against the enemy of our souls. It is the one, the only TJ Pelham. How are you doing today, Tom?
Hello, Jim. You're quoting there, obviously, a song that was covered by Muse, and I've only ever seen it performed live by Muse, and it just reminded me of being crammed into Wembley Stadium, with one of those big gigs they did, with hundreds of or thousands of people. Just that sort of stadium. We were miles away from them, but they had these sort of 8-story screens, and it was amazing. So yeah, it's good to hear that. Good to remind myself.
I like Muse. What's your favourite Muse song?
Well, I love their first album actually. It's raw and kind of interesting. So I like Sunbeam.
Sunbeam. What about Plug-in Baby? I know that's their most famous song probably, but that's a great song, isn't it?
They've got loads of great songs, Jamie. They've got loads of great songs.
Yeah. No, I just really like that. I find that really nice, that song. What we wouldn't give to be able to go to a gig, any gig really. I mean, I haven't even been to a gig probably in my 30s, but I would just love to go to a gig. I mean, Muse, amazing. That'd be amazing.
It would be good. It would be great.
Were you ever in a mosh pit, Tom?
I was. I used to have my hair down to the middle of my back, Jamie. And I was a big fan of heavy metal. I used to go and see power metal bands as they toured.
Yeah.
Moshed away. It was very friendly. I liked it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I was really into Metallica when I was a teenager, and Iron Maiden. I saw Metallica and Iron Maiden once within an 8-day period, and at the same venue at Earl's Court, and it was quite amazing. Really, it was a fantastic week. And with Metallica, I was standing, and there was some moshing there and some crowd surfing and things like that. With Iron Maiden, I was actually in a seat right at the back of Earl's Court, and a bit like what you were describing with Muse. I was miles away. Honestly, it was absolutely awesome. Seriously, it's probably the best gig I've ever been to. I
like Iron Maiden as well, big fan, and I like the fact that Bruce Dickinson, didn't rest on his laurels as a pop star, but became an airplane pilot.
Oh yeah, and a fencer as well. He I think he was an Olympic standard fencer.
Wow. Okay, that's cool.
I don't mean putting up boundaries between gardens. I mean,
I can only imagine what an Olympic standard fencer in that term would look like, Jamie, but I imagine it would be impressive. To be honest, my experience of fencers in terms of workmen is that they do it as slowly as possible.
in order to extract the cash.
No, that's very unfair. Sorry if there are any fencers out there.
We're supposed to be on the side of the working man, Tom.
I know.
Not slagging them off with our outrageous accusations.
Middle class.
Absolutely.
Privilege. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, we should do an alternative podcast about metal, because I was a huge fan of metal, and I've kind of lost the love now. Although I have to say, I've listened to quite a lot of Rage Against the Machine the last year. Sometimes in the morning, I listen to a song like Take the Power Back or Wake Up. I mean, Wake Up, that's got to be the anthem to this whole thing, isn't it?
Wake Up, yeah. I always remember them. Well, especially as it's the sort of signature tune of The Matrix, isn't it? Yeah. That wonderful scene at the end where he steps out of the phone box and just flies off before Matrix. Well, obviously, the second and third film, which completely, utterly disregarded. But the first film, a piece of absolute cinematic genius. And
it's brilliant. The Christological aspect of it. I mean, particularly at the end when he's on the phone, basically preaching the gospel to the machines. It's like patristic Eastern theology, just kind of transmuted into a science fiction film, and talking about how he's going to set people free, and that you want this for them, but I'm going to show them the truth. And then he literally ascends into heaven. Yeah. And then Wake Up by Rage Against the Machine kicks in. It's honestly, I think it's my favorite moment in all of film history, the end of The Matrix. It is fantastic.
Yeah.
So
no, it's a great piece of art.
So if anyone's not watched The Matrix, I just watch it right now. Stop listening to the podcast. Stop watching.
Come back in an hour and a half. Yeah.
Come back.
Don't watch the second or third though. I mean, actually,
Okay.
I basically had to train myself to believe that they never made a sequel. It's very sad they never made a sequel because there was a great sort of hanging sort of potential for a sequel there. But
so good.
It could have been great, but they never did, and
never got the funding.
Never got the funding.
Yeah, Keanu moved on to other things, sadly. But honestly, if you've not watched The Matrix, just go and watch The Matrix right now. We won't be offended. Come back later if you're not just so overwhelmed with awe that you are, catatonic, basically. But it's a fantastic film, one of my favorite films, and so sort of so relevant to what's going on now. The blue pill, red pill. I mean, it is a metaphor which directly and powerfully and pertinently speaks to the situation we're living in. Take the blue pill, you'll be all right. You'll wake up in the Matrix, you'll be fine. You'll believe that that's reality and you'll feel good about yourself. Take the red pill, it's going to be scary, but you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that is what's going on, isn't it, Tom? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so, Jamie. In fact, talking of sort of speaking directly into the situation, we ought to move from that to the situation.
Tom, let's, before we go directly to that, I want to rectify the mistake I made last week of not doing Patreon shout out.
Oh, yes.
I've actually downloaded a spreadsheet now, so which you can do directly from Patreon, which is great. So I just want to do a quick shout out and say just thank you so much to everyone who's joined us on Patreon. There are too many people to shout out all in one episode because we've got well over 100 people now. So I'm going to say a big thank you to these people. But if you want to join our Patreon, you are very, very welcome to do that. You can just go to patreon.com/irreverends and you can sponsor this program for as much as little as £3 a month. So please go on there and you can support us a little bit financially, but then also you can become part of this growing community of people who have like-minded concerns. And it's a great place where people are very, very supportive and all sorts of connections are being made. And it's a wonderful sort of hive mind for me as well. People have been incredibly helpful and forthcoming with advice about various things that have been going on. So if you'd like to join our Patreon, patreon.com/irreverends, do join us there. And I want to give a big shout out. So I'm going to do, I don't know how many I'll do. I'm going to do 23. Stephen E, Alexander K, Ben S, Elaine B, Matthew G, Margita G, Claire, Mark P, Isaac, Nina, Denver T, Julia Ham, Lydia E, Bridget V, Bill R, Edward D, Andy M, Ben H, John F.
Did you stub your toe, or was that Bill R?
I almost said his last name, but I want to keep them sort of semi.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, fair enough.
People want to know, want to be fully identified. John F, Hillary W, James B, M, this is M Parish, so that's okay. RP, Faith Fueled Racing, amazing. Jane, Jeff B, Claire C, Stephen R, Kingsley, Keith A, Ian, Claire R, and Tim Y. I did more than 23. I think I did 33 or 32. Wow. I'm not sure. And there are another 70 to go. And hopefully there'll be even more next week. But we just want to say huge, huge thank you. It's so encouraging. And also, of course, a huge welcome to everyone who's new. Everyone who's recently discovered the podcast for whatever reason, we want to say thank you and you're so welcome here. And we hope you enjoy listening to the podcast. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can send us an email at irreverendpod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you, and your email may very well become the email of the week. We've got a good one coming up later, Tom. I have to say it's a very moving email this week, and looking forward to reading it out. But of course, Tom, as you were saying, this is a current affairs podcast where we talk about faith and current affairs, what's going on in the world. And I believe you're going to kick us off. Not kick us on. That would be weird. Kick us off with some scriptural reflections. Some of the things that have been going on.
Yeah, well, do you know what? It's, to me, one of the hardest things about this situation is it just seems to grind on and on and on. And it's very easy to and I think we've all been there. I know Jamie's been there. I know I've been there at a point where, you just sort of sit down. You're like, I cannot do this anymore. I can't I can't keep going. It's just too much, And this happens sometimes quite regularly. And it happened to me when I once again saw Boris Johnson stand up last week, and yesterday, day before yesterday, I can't remember. Time is slightly meaningless these days, isn't it? And he said, "There will be a third wave. We're gonna suffer. We're gonna perish. We're gonna, no matter what happens, gloom and doom." Now, and my heart sank just thinking, come on, can we not have just one, announcement from Boris where at least under his own terms, he said, we're doing well, and let's be honest, I do my Zoe app every day, and I check how's it going, and numbers are dropping rapidly across the country. We're coming out of this pandemic. Of course we are. It's the spring. Vaccination take-up's been high, and and there's a high level of herd immunity across the country. There are positive things, but there's never any positivity coming from our leader. And when I feel like that, there's only one verse that springs to mind. And it's a very moving verse to me because it's one of the common readings from the ancient Compline service, which is the nighttime service. And I'm going to just read it from the King James Version. "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's Matthew 11, verses 28 to 30. And it's Jesus talking to, anyone really who reads those words, I would say. "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden." We're all heavy laden at times in this pandemic, but Christ is the one who can bear us because he's already borne us on the cross for our sins. So in the end, when I see Boris Johnson, I see a floundering buffoon who has no real power to change this this epidemic. He doesn't. Just like King Canute stood and commanded the tides to come in as in the original as a demonstration of his lack of power. In the retelling as a sign of his hubris, Boris Johnson has no power over this world, but Christ does. So if you are weary, if you are heavy laden, if you're sick of this labor, put it on Christ, and he will bear it. That's my starting reflection.
That's wonderful. Yeah, amen. Of course. I think that one of the things that's been so hard about this whole thing is, for many people, having this kind of paradigm shattering experience of realizing that the politicians are, essentially lying. I believe that they're lying, but even if you don't go that far and you think that they are just kind of caught in some kind of ideological delusion and they're sort of honestly mistaken, it is nevertheless a hard thing to let go of the hope that they might sort of come out of it and start seeing sense. I reached that point many months ago, but I'm sure there are still lots of people who switch on the TV and watch these briefings. I don't watch them anymore. Just there's no point. And in fact, I think it's worse than there's no point. I think they're deliberately designed to make people anxious. But they probably they switch on the TV and they're hoping that after well over a year that there's going to be some good news, and of course there never is, because they want to perpetuate this situation as much as possible. But everyone's always hoping that there is, but it's just relentless negativity and doom, as you say, Tom, doom and gloom and fear mongering, and it's awful. But the spiritual lesson, of course, as you were saying, is that we've got to stop putting our hope in these people and their absurd solutions. And of course, as those who follow Christ, we say that the only hope is in God, and to look to Christ to show us God. But yeah, this is what I always say to people: is you just got to stop watching these things. There's no point watching these briefings.
Leave Facebook. I left Facebook about 4 months ago, Jamie. I haven't actually needed it once. You can. For those who are listening, you can leave it, but stay on Facebook Messenger. So that's what I've done. Right? I've no page. It's really refreshing. I left Twitter. What does Twitter achieve? It achieves nothing. It's just empty voices shouting into the wind, including, unfortunately, irreverends. No, actually, to be fair,
you can follow us on at irreverends.
do you know what? You can do good. I'm sure you can do good on Twitter, and you can link up with people who are like-minded. But if you think you're going to change minds without changing hearts, then and that's the big problem, isn't it? That's where Christ comes in. He changes hearts because people are feared. Their hearts are feared.
Yes.
And until that changes, we're not going to see substantial change because that's what it is. But trusting God.
Yeah. Amen.
And
carry on.
that's what do you know what, Jamie? There's an interesting paradigm about the government, which I once saw something about the newspapers, and I think it applies to the government as well, because there's a weird belief in newspapers. Whenever you see an article that you actually have any knowledge on, even in the sort of in the press that you would regard as kind of good quality, Telegraph, Guardian, Times, that you might regard as
Guardian. Are you joking?
I mean,
you seem to be trying to slip in some kind of agenda this morning. I heard anyway. All right, carry on.
I don't read any of them anymore, but Spectator as well. They're all the same. Whenever you read an article on a subject in which you know anything about, it becomes obvious that the journalist literally doesn't know what they're talking about, because they don't. They're media graduates, aren't they? On the whole, journalists are fairly ignorant, unless they're kind of very specialised, and even then. So they become sort of caught by groupthink. So when you read something, when I read something about music or theology, I look at it and think this journalist just simply doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah. But then everyone makes the assumption that everything else they read is by people who have authoritative kind of knowledge about the subject. And actually, what's happening is every single article is of a similar level. Everywhere, someone who actually knows something about it looks at it and goes, "That's ludicrous." Yeah. Everything they say is flawed, and it's the same with the government. Whenever you come into touch with the government, in any respect, there's always problems. I've never had a smooth relationship with any part that I've come into touch with. They've always been human, and that's fine. But then so all the bits that you meet are fallible and human, but then everyone seems to assume the rest of it miraculously works perfectly.
Yeah.
And of course it doesn't. Well, I mean, why would it? It's all just humans. They're just as capable of groupthink. They're just as capable of being duplicitous, of being fooled, of being mistaken. So there's a weird authority sort of loving streak that's been revealed, and maybe it's always been there. Turns out we're a nation not of sort of Schindlers, but a nation of Patains, I think, the Marshall Patain. And no, maybe it's not quite that bad, but, on the whole, that sort of English kind of my home is my castle sort of feeling seems to have been winnowed away over the last few years.
Well, I think it's the middle class left, isn't it, that have acquiesced to this. Ironically, given that Boris Johnson, Mr. Brexit, is the one who's in charge of it. But I mean, yeah, this is one of the things I think from a Christian perspective is people are very sort of reticent to start thinking about what's behind this or who might be pulling the strings. But from a Christian perspective, I can't see any reason why people should shy away from that conversation, because everyone seems to be so sort of rush. I mean, lots of lockdown skeptics seem to want to sort of rush towards this explanation that this is just incompetence. And of course, incompetence is real. But as Christians, we have, and depending on what type of Christian you are, you have a doctrine of original sin as well. So, human beings are fallen, and that's not just a broken mind, that's a broken soul as well. And that means that there are people who, that we're all sinful, that we all do bad things, and that we all don't honor God as we should. But there are people who are evil, and they've given themselves over to evil, and they want to manipulate people, and they want to deceive people, and they want to control people's view of reality. And if in any competitive business, people have to expend an awful lot of energy to climb those hierarchies, and they often do that through nepotism and through essentially deceit, through abandoning their principles. And so as you go higher and higher in these hierarchies, you do get people who have psychopathic tendencies. And you can talk to any sort of honest person who's been involved in big business or in the media, and they'll tell you this. So the media is absolutely, the mainstream media anyway, is absolutely controlled by the people who own the newspapers, like the organizations like Reuters. So there's no reason to think that these people are telling the truth or that they know what they're talking about. Go on, Tom.
Well, and indeed, I mean, one thing, I don't know whether you've noticed, but about half of the advertising in mainstream media these days seems to be from the government. So, of course, there's an obvious conflict of interest there. I mean, I rather hope that there are at least a couple of outlets that won't have taken that Judas gold. But
I mean, can you name one? Because
I don't think Spiked has, to be fair, but they're not really.
Spiked are kind of alternative media, aren't they? They're a bit like Unheard or something like that.
Yeah, so those are where I sort of go for my comment these days, because they feel a little bit more. I don't think the Spectator. I've not seen any Spectator articles.
What about the completely uncritical interview with Matt Hancock in January?
Yeah, I mean
where he said that once the vulnerable people had been vaccinated, the lockdown would be lifted. And guess what? That hasn't happened, Matt. You said cry freedom. You were lying. You were lying in the Spectator, Matt. You're a liar. Sorry, Tom. Carry on.
Well, yeah, I mean, either he's a liar or he has no principles worth talking about. He may have changed his mind, of course, but quite why? He hasn't given any rationale for it.
Well, he changed his mind without saying why or what his what his rationale was or anything, really. He just changed his mind and then pretended he hadn't changed his mind, which
that is weird. I mean, the other Grant Schnaps is the other one who for some reason, I mean, to be fair to the man, he keeps going on talk radio and being called up about it by what's her name? Sorry,
he's been on with Julia.
Yeah, and a number of times, and he seems to have absolutely no answer to why he's not on the barricades crying for freedom. Because, let's be honest, it's nice to be able to go to the shops, Jamie. I never thought I'd say that. I've never thought I'd say it's nice to be able to go to the shops. And it's nice to be able to shiver in a pub beer garden. But those are, we're still fundamentally under lockdown here, and we're still sitting with the threat from our government of returning into it, hanging over us. And both of those things are unacceptable. They're still unacceptable.
Well, yeah, it's just a grim inevitability, Tom. It is going to happen. I mean, it's just anyone can see what they're doing now. Anyone can see what these press conferences are designed to do.
It's softening us up for it, and inevitably there will be a vaccine escaping variant, because that's what diseases do. They change in order to get around adaptive immune systems. If they don't adapt, whether you adapt the immune system through infection naturally or through a vaccine, this makes no difference. And they will eventually get around it. And there'll be the problem is the vaccines can't keep up with that, can they? So under this threat hanging over us is inevitability of a cycle of constant lockdowns, and it's only going to get worse because other pathogens will adapt, and we won't be exposed to them as they adapt, and then we'll be in a situation where there's compromised societal immunity to them. A bit like the American natives when they sort of received the European viruses for the first time. It decimated their population. The more isolated we are as a civilization, as a world, the worse it's going to get. And you'll get to a point, that's the inevitable end of zero COVID and of chasing the vaccine dragon.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to know where you are on this, Tom, because it was a little bit difficult last week because there were four of us. But I think that this stuff about variants and so on, I just think it's made up, basically. And I think that there may be some variants, but like Mike Eden said, they're not significant enough to escape the vaccine because
no, maybe the ones that are around aren't, Jamie, but there will be one.
No, yeah, but fine. But anyway, the point is, whether there is one or not, the reason they're trying to bring in vaccine passports is nothing to do with protecting people from COVID. It's about controlling people. Essentially, it's about creating a database with people's medical records on it and using that database to control people's movements and to coerce them into having vaccines. And this leads elegantly seamlessly, almost as though we'd planned it, to talk about these vaccine passports and vaccines in general. I noticed that the Tony Blair Institute, or whatever it's called, which I affectionately think of as the Emperor Palpatine Institute, seeing as Tony Blair seems to look more and more like the Dark Emperor each day. They've been talking about the way that I believe that Blair has been saying that there needs to be, hang on a second, I've got it here somewhere, I'll get it up. So Blair has been saying, have I got it? Yeah. Yes.
Here it is. Yeah.
Vaccine hesitancy must be confronted. And how should it be confronted? With more education, with more press, with more publicity. So that's what we need. We need a global campaign in order to decrease and presumably discourage vaccine hesitancy, because apparently all vaccine hesitancy is completely unjustified. And also the blanket coverage we've had promoting these vaccines has not been sufficient to eradicate vaccine hesitancy.
I don't know why he's. I mean, in the UK at least. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The vaccine take up has been better than Sage anticipated, as I understand. We're I'm not surprised, because there's been constant publicity about it already. So I'm not quite sure what he thinks more publicity is going to achieve. The other thing, of course, is that actually we're discovering rare side effects in particularly the AstraZeneca, but I believe in the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, that actually do cause substantial problems in people, in enough people that once you get under a certain age, your risk from taking the vaccine is higher than your risk from COVID. And that's to promote the vaccine to those people, to coerce them, to encourage them, is deeply troubling. And very, it's unethical. It's immoral.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, to be honest, the vaccine giving out should be a matter for the doctors, and they should, and you should be aware, like you are with all other medicine, of made aware of the potential risks and complications, and they're simply not doing that. It's just coercion.
Yeah, exactly. And you can find, I mean, I'm looking at it right now on the government website, the list of reports, of people reporting side effects and deaths from Pfizer and AstraZeneca. You can look at it right there on the government website. There are literally thousands and thousands of reports of side effects, not thousands of reports of deaths, probably, I would say, just looking through it, probably dozens. But the idea that this is something which has no side effects whatsoever and no risks is just palpably false. The government's own information gives the lie to that, and I'll put it on the show notes if anyone's interested. So, I mean, yeah, like I say, Tom, I don't believe that this is about COVID-19. I don't believe that this is ultimately really about this particular vaccine. I think it's all about control. I think it's all about this agenda to start this database and get this vaccine passport scheme running. And then we've already had politicians, I think it was on Talk Radio, and to be honest, I can't actually remember which politician it was. It may have actually been a government advisor, but basically talking about how they're already developing the booster jabs. And, if they start a vaccine passport scheme for this first vaccine, I mean, why wouldn't they do it for a booster jab? Of course they will. They'll say it's temporary, and then they'll say, well, there's another variant, we need the booster jab, and we'll put that on as well. So then we'll one treatment to two treatments, and then it will proliferate.
And of course, once you've got it going for those, you might as well do it for the flu as well. And it's convenient to store everything in the same place, so why not put everything on there? And then gradually, generally speaking, this sort of information is not safe in the government's hands. There have been so many data leaks over the years. Even if they don't sort of formally coerce businesses to use this system, we'll be in a situation eventually where the data leaks and someone loses a job because the job, they weren't vaccinated for COVID or whatever. It's all too easy to see how that would play out, and it's all. I just.
Indeed. Well, Tom, this is obviously very exciting because this week, how we cover the news and everything and the current affairs. This week we are the current affair, because our letter the letter, which I must say over 1,400 church leaders have signed, which I was involved in writing, and we as a show have been involved in promoting. This letter has been covered in all the major newspapers. I think I haven't seen it in the Times, but it's been in almost every other major mainstream newspaper.
And radio show. I heard it on BBC Radio 2, Jamie. I was eating my lunch. Yeah.
Wow, there we are. And it's been, the letter was printed in full in the Spectator. So thanks for the Spectator. You know, I do apologise to an extent about all the criticism I've sent away, but thank you for that. It's been on the BBC website, and it's basically been everywhere. And essentially, our letter has now been read or heard about by millions of people. And the Church of England even released a statement. Did you see this, Tom?
No, I didn't. Go on.
We actually got the Church of England to release a statement. So let's have a look. Sorry, it may take me a minute. It may take me a minute to find this because it's in the Telegraph. But essentially, they had to, I think, say something about this. Tom, I'm going to. Oh, no, it's here. I was going to say I would have to sign into it, so I didn't want to be boring. And right, so here's what the Church of England were forced into saying as a result of our letter. A Church of England spokesman also warned against introducing vaccine passports, saying, the Church has adopted a clear policy of encouraging people to be vaccinated, but other than in very exceptional circumstances, this does not justify limiting access to church services or organisations on the basis of vaccine passports. Such an approach would run contrary to the principle of the church being a home and a refuge for all. So it's interesting because we don't actually know who said that. It's just a Church of England spokesperson. It would have been nice for a bishop or somebody to actually say that rather than pawning it off to some kind of anonymous spokesman. But I have to say this idea first, and also like spokesman, that's very kind of patriarchal, I think.
You know, I'm a little bit. I mean, you know, I'm not surprised. One thing we know that there's. I didn't know there was a policy to promote the vaccine, but other than those bishops telling everyone it was safe. But I'm not sure I was ever a member of a medical kind of organization giving out medical advice, but apparently we are now.
Well, I just think it's totally inappropriate. I mean, we can't divorce our role as pastors of people from medicine and the role that medicine plays in people's lives.
No,
so,
yeah.
In a pastorally appropriate way, at an appropriate time, if somebody were to seek my advice about this, I would have to give them my advice. Of course I would. I'm sorry, my son is bashing his small bike against my the window of my office. So apologies if anyone can hear that. Of course I would. But having a blanket policy of encouraging people to be vaccinated, regardless of who they are, I just think it's either stupid or it's immoral, or possibly both. But it's just wrong to do this, to promote the government's.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, when they say something like the church has a policy, I mean, since when does the church have a policy about non-spiritual things? In a sense, you know, the policies of the church are the 39 articles and the historic formularies of the Church of England, and those are the policies of the church, and those are the ones I signed up for. I did not sign up for any other policies. Yeah. They're free to dissent or agree or disagree to them. Oh, the safeguarding policy as well, I think probably.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's outrageous to say
it's ridiculous
to pressurize priests and people who work in churches to encourage everyone to be vaccinated regardless of what they think about it. I mean, consider, for example, apart from anything else, the issue with the aborted fetal tissue issue, which is a massive issue for loads of Christians. I mean, it's completely inappropriate for the church to be saying, all right, well, regardless of what you think about that, even if you have a grave moral objection to the fact that these vaccines were developed using aborted fetal tissue, you should nevertheless be encouraging everyone to have them. I mean, come on, this is outrageous. But then the other thing, sorry, Tom, you go ahead.
But it's not only is it outrageous, but the idea that there might be I want to know what situations they envision where a vaccine passport would be necessary to come into church, because I find that strange as well, because that again, you know, really, that's such a weaselly way of saying, you know, what do they mean by that? It's strange.
I mean, in my view, Tom, it's basically them saying it's basically a way of them saying the opposite of what this what this statement appears to mean, which it appears to mean that they're against vaccine passports, but actually clearly what they're saying is that they would be acceptable in inverted commas, very exceptional circumstances. But according to the people who are promoting this COVID-19 false narrative, this is all an exceptional circumstance. So that statement is basically leaving a massive aperture big enough to drive a lorry through, so that when the time comes, the church can support this policy. And I hope that we put the church in an invidious position at the very least in terms of getting this out there. But that statement is, I would say that statement is cowardly. It's cowardly.
Oh yeah.
Because they're not saying what they really think. It's political speak. It's not authored. We don't know who authored it. And it basically doesn't say anything at all. So I think that's just sheer cowardice.
Do you know, I'm tempted to say, as per the instructions in Matthew, whoever wrote that, if you're listening, come and talk it out in front of the elders, and judge it. Have the congregation judge it.
Is that you and me, Matt?
Well, no. I mean,
It sounded like you were. It sounded like you were going to say. It sounded like you were going to say, well, come and say it to my face. Come and
say it to my face. Come on. No. It's a weird way of communicating, and it's not a Christian one, which values honesty. It values making amends on the road to judgment, but also values going and speaking in front of the congregation and making clear what you mean. Let your yes be yes and your no no, and they failed on that. But I mean, that's to be honest, Jamie. I'm beginning to suspect that most of the church sort of communications is basically run by interns who haven't got a clue.
Well, I don't know about that, Tom. I think they're very carefully crafted. This is a very carefully crafted political statement, which is designed to basically keep the church out of trouble as much as possible. But my feeling, Tom, just increasing as time goes on, is people don't need this from the church. They don't need this kind of weaselly, mealy-mouthed, wishy-washy political speak. They want people who are actually, even people who are not Christians, they want people who are Christians to actually be real Christians and to believe in what they believe and to say what they believe. And so when we say in our letter that this would be a fundamental betrayal of the Christian faith, we mean it. Not in very exceptional circumstances would this be okay. This would never be okay. This is totally wrong, and we reject it, and we will never, ever do it. That's what people want to hear. Plain speaking. To deny people entry to hear the life-giving message of the gospel would be a fundamental betrayal of Christ in any circumstances.
Absolutely.
Any and all circumstances. Yeah. So that's the message, and that's what the church should be saying. It shouldn't be saying, except in very exceptional circumstances. There are no circumstances where this would be exceptional. Where it would be acceptable. No circumstances at all. So there we are. That's the first. I think that probably counts as the first rant of the show, Tom. But we are really so overwhelmed with happiness that this has got out there in the press.
Oh, yeah.
And we just want to encourage everyone. I mean, just to hold the line on this. If this happens, and I believe there will come a time very soon when the government will start to push this on businesses and indeed churches. When this happens, we must disobey. If it happens, I mean, I hope it doesn't, obviously, but even when it happens, we must disobey. The churches must stay open, and they must never turn people away just because they haven't had a vaccine. It must not happen. It cannot happen. And anyone who would put it in place as a Christian leader or is considering it, you've got to think again, because this is anathema to the gospel. This is anathema to the church. So I'm saying to all Christian leaders, thus far and no further. This is not going any further. We're not going to turn people away because they haven't had a vaccine. Tom, should we? I think maybe we should talk about the fact that Christianity has basically been outlawed in Ireland. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you have anything to come back on about that?
No. You go ahead. I've not actually been following the Irish situation very much, but I know that the Roman Catholic Church has complained vigorously, hasn't it?
Yeah, which is great, and we just we want to see more of this. We want to see more of senior people in the church speaking out against this assault on our freedom, on our religion, on our church. So faith leaders have reacted with anger to the outlawing of public mass and other religious services in Ireland. Health Minister Stephen Donnelly signed a regulation last week making in-person services temporarily a criminal offence and only allowing religious services to take place virtually, so not allowing them at all to take place, which is what the judgment of the Scottish court was when they overturned the illegal closure of churches by Nicola Sturgeon and others. Ireland's 4 Catholic archbishops, Eamon Martin, the Archbishop of Armagh, Primate of All Ireland, Dermot Farrell of Dublin, Michael Neary of Tuam, and Kieran O'Reilly of Cashel and Emly told the Times they would be taking legal advice following the move, which they described as a breach of trust and a potential infringement of religious freedom and constitutional rights.
Potential. I mean, yeah.
Why is it a potential? Potential. Yes, this is potentially a slight infringement of our freedom of religion. To ban all worship. You know?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean?
Saying this is potentially you're beating us and crucifying us as a potential infringement of our religious liberty. Sorry, carry on, Tom.
No, I was just wondering, what's St. George's Day in 2 days, isn't it? Who of course was possibly martyred under the Roman Emperor of the time, and I wondered if what he might have said as he was martyred for his faith. This is potentially preventing me from fully exercising my rights to religion. Anyway, yeah. I mean, that aside,
it was the Emperor Diocletian who may have
potentially
slightly, maybe just a little bit, a tiny bit. He may have gone a little bit too far in closing down freedom of religion.
But no doubt, Jamie, it was exceptional circumstances and it was warranted under those.
The early Christians, they were causing an awful lot of social fervour, and people were disturbed. So it was probably justified. Anyway, so they say this ongoing lockdown is indefensible. Yes. The government passed a law that criminalizes religious gatherings, so to either organise or to attend a religious service has now become a criminal offence in the Republic of Ireland. And for myself as a pastor, the situation has become untenable. I cannot in good conscience continue in this situation, knowing and seeing the damage that has been done in people's lives. Oh, by the way, this is a quote from John Ahern, an All Nations Church pastor. This is good. I made a decision that I'm going back to pastoring my people. And so this Sunday I've decided I'm going to meet in the Phoenix Park. There's a beautiful 50-foot cross there, and I suppose we'll see what happens. If gathering to worship is a criminal act, all I can say is I hope the government have plenty of prison space, because there's going to be a lot of ministers who will be willing to go to prison over this. And we've done everything we can over this last season to engage respectfully with the Irish government. That's a fantastic statement, and we support John Ahern, and we pray for him and all people in Ireland, all ministers who are faithful and who are going to meet with their congregation in defiance of this tyranny.
And if you're in Ireland then and you choose to do that, do let us know how it goes, and you have our prayers. I don't know if we have any Irish listeners. Do we have any Irish listeners, Jamie?
We probably do. It's just be a question of how many. It's worth saying as well that the penalty for breaches of this new law are a fine or up to 6 months in prison. So, and apparently the Irish government it's okay, because they're going to review this on May the 4th. So, so on Star Wars Day.
Why is it they always have to review these things in like 3 or 4 weeks? Apparently they went in 48 hours from telling the bishops they wouldn't be closing the churches to deciding to close the churches, and then it takes them 3 weeks to review that decision that they made in 48 hours. Do you know what? It's just duplicitous, isn't it? It's just they're lying. Yeah, they could review it now. Well, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, well, yeah, Tom. This is an attack on the Christian church. I mean, it's got nothing to do with COVID. It's a spiritual attack on the Christian church. And I think the sooner people wake up and realise that this is, we even if it were to do with COVID, this is not a reasonable way of asking people to operate, to close your church down every 5 minutes when a handful of people have a virus. It's absolute madness. Even the justification, even if it was true, it would still be madness. But it's not true. It's just a load of rubbish. we
Well,
talk,
it's quite, yeah.
go on, you carry on.
It's quite clear that the churches being open here have not led to vast numbers of congregations, dying, or the virus being spread in these churches, which really makes you question how much, given that, in very similar situations to pubs, to other things, how much of this is actually necessary. We know it's not particularly necessary, but it's another thing that it might hint to you, going, actually, how much of this narrative is simply some government scientists making stuff up. But let's be honest. I can't remember what I was going to say now. I got stuck. Let's be honest. It's not okay. It's not okay to use criminal law, to enforce public health. That's not a relationship between the state and the citizen, or the subjects, as we are here, that is tenable, that is proportionate, that is possible to uphold within a democratic society. Public health is not criminal law, and that's a problem that the whole world has been under, really. But until what, 18 months ago, no, less than that, 15 months ago, that was a completely uncontroversial statement. The liberal West does not use criminal law to enforce public health. It doesn't. It just doesn't.
So Tom, I mean, this is a serious talking point, isn't it? And like I said on last week's show, I mean, we didn't quite have enough space to sort of go into this in too much detail. But now it's just you and me. We've got the opportunity, I think. So I guess my question to you is, I mean, how can you explain this, except for that this is a coordinated attack on humanity in order to bring about a preconceived political end?
I'm not entirely convinced that there is a sort of plot against us. I think what's happened, although I'm certain that there are various people who have been using this for their own ends. We know that Susan Mitchell in Sage, for example, is a member of the Communist Party. Certainly, there's a high level of left-wing sort of authoritarian sympathies within academia and certainly within the Sage committees. I think it's fair to say, because the entirety of academia is gripped by sort of left-wing kind of orthodoxy, and I think that's part of the issue. I think actually what we're seeing is a perfect storm. We're in a situation where we're not taught the sort of foundational reasons of the democratic society we inherited. They're not really taught, because it's partly, at least I think, because the whole era under which it developed, which I would say would be the 16th, 17th, and 18th and 19th centuries, is sort of slated as a sort of white imperialistic colonial kind of era, which nothing good can come out of. Now, so the idea that you might study the great thinkers of our past, the Burkes, the not Burke as in B-R-K, but B-U-R-C-K, the William Pitt, so some of the great constitutional minds of the past, people just it's not taught in schools anymore. I was really lucky in that it was taught in my secondary school, and I was able to engage with a lot of that stuff. I think also we've got to a position where health and safety has really encroached on us. We really are moving, and this is a continuation of the idea that we can live and dwell in perfect safety, brought about by humankind and our own efforts, and that's a pernicious lie that's inherent, everywhere. And the sort of risks that were commonplace even only 30 years ago are no longer done. But if you go back much further, and we no longer value risk as the counterpart of freedom. And so when the government comes and says, oh, well, we're just going to take away your freedoms in order to keep you safe, everyone just sort of nodded, many people just nodded and went along with it. They don't really understand quite how little authority the government had to do that. They didn't understand how, not technical authority, but sort of moral authority, so to speak. They didn't see why it was an issue. They didn't raise their arms and stop obeying, and so the government kept going. Because in the end, I mean, we saw it after World War II. If you give the government powers, they like to keep it. So rationing kept going for way too long. And the idea that you had to carry your papers around for a good decade after World War II, it didn't need to be there. They just kept it because it's convenient.
Yeah, they kept it. They kept it because they'd acquired the habit, and once governments acquire these habits, they don't want to unacquire them. Go on. I don't want to interrupt.
Right. No, and I think a lot of, like, for example, the NHS. We've had a lot of fawning articles about the NHS's sort of anniversary coming up, and I saw one the other day, and you know, it's a product of a statist kind of governmental kind of overreach that has just been allowed to continue. We've you know, it's weird, but I suspect that people are, we've spoken about this before, people are more free in places with, you know, places like Russia nowadays. I suspect the Russians are more free than we are, just because the government can't hope to control them in the way that, you know, or we spoke about Egypt, you know, or, you know, these places living under authoritarian dictatorships where actually people probably have more basic freedoms, not guaranteed, not state-given freedoms, but just the essential, you know, actual practical freedoms that you have, than we do, because, you know, the government can't and so won't and so doesn't control them. But so media is the other problem, isn't it? Our kind of constant obsession with media.
I mean, so Tom, I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is true. I mean, I agree with it, most of it, if not all of it. I just think that it doesn't sufficiently explain what's going on. And I think that the main thing that convinces me that there is something pernicious and deceitful and coordinated going on here, I mean, I don't know about the main thing, but certainly one of them is that there does appear to me to be a globally coordinated series of agreed upon measures, which we all know what they are: social distancing, lockdowns, masks, and obviously vaccines as well, which are, at least some of them, are demonstrably harmful and counterproductive. As well as that, there are other things that could have been done to ameliorate the problem, which we know would have done. There are other things, like just completely harmless things, like encouraging people to take, I think, vitamins D and E and zinc. Zinc is especially effective. Hydroxychloroquine, which is it's one of the least harmful drugs on the planet, which has been inexplicably banned in GP surgeries in America, for example. Ivermectin is another product which apparently does a lot to ameliorate COVID-19. So we've got this parallel thing where there are these measures which are harmful, which are counterproductive, which essentially kill people or make people very ill. Masks are, they're terribly unhealthy, and they don't protect anyone from the virus. And everyone knows this, who knows anything about masks. And lockdowns, which, the evidence is demonstrably clear that they haven't done anything, but it's become this kind of orthodoxy that these are the measures which work. And then all these other things which are cheap, which are harmless, which could easily be rolled out to populations. They've been utterly derided, and all the resources of the media, the government, to a very large extent the academy as well, have been trained towards discrediting these things. Now and it's not just like this has just happened in one or two countries. This has happened in every single Western country where they've responded in this way. Now, it hasn't happened all at the same time exactly, but it's basically been happening in the same way, in a kind of almost like a kind of staggered but coordinated sequence. And so it seems to me that these measures are intended to produce deliberate harm, and also they also function to spread psychological terror. I mean, I think masks are particularly, this kind of visual symbol of fear and control. And the other aspect of this, so obviously these things are intended to harm people, but then the other aspect of this is that this is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, away from small to medium-sized businesses to these massive corporations and companies like Amazon. Which is increased in value. I'm not sure how much, but a lot.
Enormously,
enormously. And hang on, just 1 second, and then you can see the other stuff that's coming in as well, which, you know, if this were a deliberate plan to essentially crash the global economy and replace it with a digital currency. I mean, the Bank of England were literally saying they were going to produce a digital currency earlier this week. We got this vaccine passport thing, which is quite clearly a precursor to a far more complicated and augmented system of governmental control. I mean, it just seems to me that, I mean, just well, take that issue, Tom. Like, why would they be trying to bring in vaccine passports if they weren't trying to, if there were no agenda? Because it's so obviously nothing to do with COVID-19 now. So, sorry, I know there's a lot of stuff there, but I'm interested to hear your response.
Well, I just don't think that Boris is competent enough to pull off something like that. I mean, I rather, I don't know if anyone else is. We could put a link to it. This is 6th of April article by Tom Slater in Spiked called "Boris Johnson, Bumbling Authoritarian." The tagline is, "A PM who believes in nothing is a very dangerous thing." And he says at the conclusion, he says, Boris is not some authoritarian hellbent on ushering in a tyranny under the cover of COVID. It's almost worse and certainly more pathetic than that. His bumbling authoritarianism is the product of a politician with no views of his own to back on, no principles to guard against the pressures of governing in times of crisis. And as this crisis has taught us, a prime minister who believes in nothing is a very dangerous thing. I honestly think that he's completely without anchor. Now,
he's a puppet for people who are using him, isn't he? I mean, that logic would still apply if that were the case as well.
I honestly think, Jamie, that you don't have to look much further than incompetence to explain most of what's going on.
Well, I mean, do you really think that's plausible? It's plausible to say that the same sort of incompetence has manifested itself in exactly the same way across, I don't know how many nations, but what are we talking about? 30, 40 nations are doing exactly the same thing.
I just don't think you can
making exactly the same mistakes.
I just don't think you can. I mean, it's not the first time that's happened, Jamie. For one thing,
Really?
Coordinating mistakes. I mean, you know, look at the Great Depression and the and various other points in the history where the whole sort of worldwide things have sort of seemed to go together. And I mean, you don't have to look much further than things like the Danish. Was it the Rose Bubble? Or was it tulip? But I can't remember when the price they sort of a big bubble burst, and it was basically a mass delusion about the value of an imported flower. I think humanity is capable, and social media has made us is capable of astonishing moments of groupthink, of imbecilic groupthink. And that unfortunately our governments are not immune to it. I also think that a lot of people, and this maybe is more towards this sort of thing. I think a lot of people who believe in this sort of authoritarian health measures have been spending a lot of time getting close to power, and people like Neil Ferguson, who have put a lot of time into becoming sort of effectively politicians with spreadsheets. And getting onto things like SAGE, and I think that's Fauci in the US, and there's a sort of public health has a sort of authoritarianism to it anyway. It's always quite a utilitarian calculation, and it doesn't care much for individual liberty, and that's why I've always really disagreed with its as a kind of genre. It's not of course an academic discipline on its own. It's sort of psychology. Mixed with a variety of other bits and bobs, but I just think people have been.
Sorry, you go.
There's been groundwork laid towards this sort of response for a long time now. There's absolutely and also technology has made it possible.
It sounds like you're saying a similar thing to me. I mean, I believe that there's been groundwork laid for this, that there are people who want this to happen, have wanted it to happen for a long time. You only need to read the Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. I mean, he wrote the book. It's not a conspiracy theory. He wrote the book called the Great Reset. I mean, these people they've been planning this and want. I mean, I'm not saying I'm agnostic about the idea that. I mean, I think it very well could be the case that COVID-19 was made in a laboratory and deliberately released. I mean, Brett Weinstein, for example, believes that it was the evidence. I was listening to him talking to Jordan Peterson recently. The evidence shows that the virus was made in a lab. Now, he doesn't believe it was released on purpose, but I don't really see any reason to rule that out as an explanation. But anyway, what I'm saying is basically I'm agnostic about that. But regardless of whether one thinks that this was entirely planned, I don't think it's really plausible to say that there are no people behind the scenes who are actively pushing some kind of globalist, what is basically a kind of globalist, communist, technocratic agenda. I mean, it seems to me quite obvious that there are. I mean, they're not even secret. Like the WEF isn't secret, and the Trilateral Commission is not secret. They're you can Google them. You can see a list of members. Keir Starmer is a member of the Trilateral Commission. So these things are real. I guess the only question for me is to what extent are they all working together in lockstep to bring about a situation which is to an extent concealed from humanity. And I say to an extent because I think it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a kind of a globalist government with a digital currency, and with they want some kind of database with everyone's names and information on it. That's what I think anyway.
Okay. I mean, yes, yeah. I think there's.
Have I convinced you?
No, not quite, Jamie. I still think that the main driver of this is incompetence, groupthink, and terror, and sort of a more mature government might have. They're very new as a government when it happened. Might have reacted differently, and if we had reacted differently, I think the world might have reacted differently. That said, because I mean, we followed Italy, and Italy have sort of notorious sort of. For their slightly incompetent governments, aren't they? Anyway,
yeah,
is that fair? I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's the government in Italy just is not functioning at the moment.
It's not, and we are an old, I think, more deeply rooted nation state with the responsibility of having brought common law to the world and that sort of to much of the world, and that sort of legacy of liberty. And we should have had a prime minister who could have seen that. Now, as to all the other people, yes, there are opportunists, Jamie. I agree, there are opportunists, and there are even people who have been working towards this sort of thing for a while. But I don't see a sort of worldwide sense of sort of a driving force behind it. I think it's just. I don't think they have that much power. It's much like I don't think the government has that much power. I don't think that these sort of big organisations have as much power as they like to think they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's. I'll let you have the last word on that, Tom, and be interested to hear our feedback from our listeners and viewers. The debate continues. I mean, in some ways, we're like a kind of ecclesiastical version of Delingpole and Toby Young on this, because they obviously have those views which sort of map onto ours, don't they? I think our conversations are more, probably a little bit more genteel than theirs, because they get quite heated, but they're still friends, so there's no problem there. And of course, we're still friends. Of course, because we're actual liberals. That's what I would say to leftists. I am the most liberal person you will ever meet. I mean, seriously, I'm so tolerant of the views of other people. I never get angry with people for disagreeing with me. I don't hate people if they disagree with me. I am actually in that sense a liberal. And it's the leftists who are illiberal because they can't tolerate people who have different opinions.
I consider myself to be a classical liberal. Yes. That's how I describe my my political affiliation, and actually a Whig as well. I mean, I know that party has sort of disappeared, which is a bit of a shame, but about 100 years ago. But I'm a Whig. A Gladstonian.
Okay. Well, if anyone would like to look up any of these terms, you can purchase The Victorians by Jacob Rees-Mogg on Amazon, and there'll be a comprehensive description of what who these people are and what they believed. So just go and find Rees-Mogg's book. Tom, now that we've promoted Jacob Rees-Mogg's The Victorians,
who's one of the big disappointments, isn't it? Because he's someone who who you would have thought would be, he's generally a small state, low government interference sort of
Yeah.
person, and yet in this he's been thoroughly orthodox. I mean, the problem is he's got his bag of silver, isn't he? He's got his 50 coins because he's and he can't, or he won't give that up.
He's a massive disappointment. I mean, I remember listening to him, watching some videos of his. I think Queen Mary University was doing a Q&A, and he said, "The man at Whitehall knows best is the antithesis of everything I believe about government." And now look at what he's doing. I just think he's a total sellout, if I'm honest with you. But Tom, let's talk about. You wanted to talk about this documentary. I think we've maybe got 15 minutes left, so let's talk about this race documentary on Panorama.
So, I mean, this is a kind of continuation of the Church of England's kind of thrashing around and about in the aftermath of Black Lives Matters. And there's all sorts of problems with how this is going. I think it's quite interesting because the government commission, which has caused a great deal of angst in liberal media about, which has concluded that whilst there are racism does exist in the UK, structural racism is not really a thing, or at least there are other things which explain. For example, the socio-economic differences between black and white people in England better. They point out quite rightly that white working class boys actually do worse than black working class boys, which is and things like that. Anyway, the Church of England, however, hasn't sort of gone and done a sort of quite such a level-headed thing, and BBC Panorama has picked up. On this sort of soul searching, and has produced a program looking at whether the church is racist. And there's rather a good article looking at it by Archbishop Cranmer, the blogger, not the long dead Archbishop, obviously.
The 16th century now.
And effectively, he's arguing that the BBC Panorama have rather smeared the church. Which the church has rather opened itself to, because when you start a sort of process of discernment by saying yes, the church is institutionally racist, and then work from that point, well, it's no surprise that the BBC is going to turn and look at how the church is institutionally racist. And again, I'm not going to say there's no racism in the church. I've seen racism in the church. I've seen it firsthand. And I've not towards me, obviously, but I've been present when some truly shocking things have been said by various people. But the Panorama attack is rather is rather unfair, in as much as they sort of found the sort of 10 or I think it was, where does it say here? They found some clergy who have experienced awful abuse from the church and from other members of clergy, or from fellow ordinands, or from tutors, or from their flocks. They have found some of that. But also they've completely sort of rolled over the fact that actually the Church of England is, I think on the whole, a very open organisation to anyone who comes in. As Cranmer points out of 800,000 worshippers, you're bound to find some racists. And out of 11,000 clergy, you're bound to find a couple of dozen who hold racist views. Like I say, I've met them, met some of them. But what we haven't got is a church that's full of problematic racism. Yeah. And things like saying, I mean, one person says only 1 in 10 people accepted in training in the Church of England are from ethnic minority backgrounds. Well, actually, only 13% of the population is. So it's actually not far off a balanced sort of, a balanced intake. It's not. They're not being fair to the church, which, whilst it does have problems, I don't think is deeply institutionally racist, as the Archbishop of Canterbury told Synod. I think it's institutionally middle class, and I think that's a problem. And I think it's institutionally snobbish. I think that's certainly an issue. but I don't think it's institutionally racist.
I think it's institutionally heretical, Tom. Do you think that's
That
do you
too.
think that's a
Yeah,
fair,
possibly.
that's a fair comment? Well, I mean, it's at least as institutionally heretical as it is institutionally racist. I mean, I'm not even sure that I believe in something being institutionally anything. It's just it's made up. It's made up of individuals who may or may not be racist or heretics. The episcopate is a mixture of people who are heretics and orthodox and somewhere in between. It's just this whole idea of institutional racism. I've just never ever received an explanation as to what that actually means. Literally, what does it mean? I mean, do you know? Can you tell me? What does it mean?
I guess that the idea is that, and I believe that there's a report being released. Is it today?
Well, Tom, I'm looking at it right now. In fact, Calvin Robinson just sent it to me. I just saw it ping in my inbox. So I've seen it. It's 30 pages long. I mean, is anyone actually going to read the whole thing? I doubt it. But
well, at least it's slightly more readable than Living in Love and Faith, hey?
From lament to action, that's what it's called. Anyway, carry on.
And they released it today, I believe, because it's Stephen Lawrence Day today. Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is obviously another case of this sort of institutional racism. But again, are we sure that it's institutional racism, or is it just not racism of those coppers?
Yeah. You're about to tell me what institutional racism.
I guess you could set up an organisation that had in its ground of being. I'm sounding a bit like Tillich there, aren't I? There's an in-joke for theological students.
Anyone who's interested in early 20th century Protestant liberalism, there's a great in-joke there. Yeah.
That you could have, for example, an institution where you didn't allow black people to pastors. I guess that would be, and that sort of segregation would obviously be completely wrong. Obviously, I guess you could be more subtle and have sort of ways of organizing it that discriminated against black people in a sort of subtle way, like you might not ban black people from leading, but you have to have a received pronunciation in order to be a leader. I guess that
would discriminate against white working class people as much as it would black people. Sorry. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's helping me understand something of what it is. But then it's really hard to actually point to instances of institutional racism in the Church of England if it is things like that, like sort of explicitly racist rules or barriers or guidelines.
Well, do you know where I have experienced it quite a lot, Jamie? It's where if it's not necessarily institutional racism, but certainly it's racism by members of the institution, which is a different thing. It is where there's a lot of sneering about Black African theology and Pentecostal churches.
Yeah.
And I think there's a sort of superiority complex going on there.
But is that not just the fact that those people are theologically orthodox and believe Scripture, and that the liberals in the church don't like it? And so
I think there's an idea that there's a pernicious idea that they're being manipulated by white evangelicals, as if the idea being they have no ability of their own to work these things out, to read the Bible. They have to, the only way that the black churches could possibly contribute to theology is as a expression of white evangelical kind of.
Yeah, like they have no agency of their own. I mean, the ironic thing about that is basically this is this sort of post-colonial critique, isn't it? Or the only reason these people are this way is because of white British people, basically. And we, as white British people, we're going to tell them that really they should be liberals, and then they'll listen to us. I mean, it's just is that not just a perpetuation of the same phenomenon? If indeed that critique is even relevant if it's accurate in the first place. I mean, those liberals are just doing exactly the same thing, aren't they? They're just colonialists, but they're colonizing the black churches with liberalism. I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I'd be absolutely delighted if the church said, look, we need to fill our posts and open the doors to black Orthodox clergy from Nigeria or from it'd be fantastic.
Bring them in.
Bring them in.
Let's have a 50% quota for black priests and bishops from Nigeria. I'm very happy, very happy. Let's bring them in. Let's bring them in, Tom. I wonder if it's going to say that in the report. Will it say that? I wonder.
But the problem is they don't. There's a sense in which the liberal church kind of leadership, and I have to be very careful here, don't really want black people for their for the things that actually matter. I mean, you get the sense they want them for their skin color because it looks more diverse, but they don't actually want them for their intellect or what they bring theologically,
or their godliness, or their
godliness. Yes, diversity is good, but it's much bigger problem than diversity of skin color, isn't it? I mean, in the church as a whole, I mean, we're as I say, institutionally, if anything, middle class.
Yeah, of course, and the groups of people who are discriminated against in the church institutionally, I would say, are working class people, basically. Working class people and people who have not been to university.
Yeah, and yes, again, don't get me wrong. There is racism from members of church, from the laity, from the clergy, and probably even from the bishops.
Well, you say that, Tom. I've never seen anyone being racist in our church. I literally couldn't think of a single example. So, I mean, the only racism I can think of is the kind of racism that you've been describing, which is coming from liberals who hate conservative Christians, and so they castigate these African churches as culturally backwards. I mean, honestly, I can't think of a single example of racism. Like, this idea that racism is whispered in the pews. Honestly, our church is here in Nottingham. It's racially diverse. It would never even occur to anyone to be racist. It's just a non-issue.
I think that's. I mean, I certainly think that if there is anything the church can do, and what it ought to be doing, is things like opening up the See of Canterbury, the leadership of the Anglican Communion to a wider kind of, maybe even a electoral college sort of system, rather than keeping it in-house. Having a rotating head of the Primarch through the Primarch. Sorry, that's.
Rotating head of Primarch. Let's get some more diversity in Primarch as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
Institutionally racist.
Having a rotating sort of head of the Anglican Church through the, and it would, given that most Anglicans are black, it would mostly be black people who would be running the church, and that would be good. Again, a good thing.
I'm more than happy for black people to run the church. Instead of English white people. I mean, let's go to the countries where there are black people and let them run the church. You know what I would say about this, though, Tom? I mean, I've not read this report. Obviously, it's just been sent to me, and I'm just looking at it now. But it's all. What I would say is, I mean, there's obviously some lip service to theology, but basically I think that this is all about external things, right? It's like, we're going to change this by having quotas, having education, having training and mentoring, changing our governance and structures. But the thing that this is missing is that this is completely unchristian. This is not the way that Christianity works. I mean, I know that sounds extreme, and I'm deliberately being provocative there, but no, this is not right. The way that the world is transformed around us is not by external things of this sort. It's by a transformation of the heart, and the only way that our hearts can be transformed is by Christ and by the Holy Spirit and through the gospel. And so, as I say, I've not read this task force report, but my question would be, is this an application of the gospel, or is this just more legalistic baggage, which the church is burdening people with, particularly priests and congregations, in order to achieve some kind of PR aim? I was saying, I had the privilege of being on the Richie Allen show yesterday, and I was able to say to him, look, the way to solve the problem of racism, and I'm not saying there's no problem with racism, because in some places there might be. I don't really have any experience of it, but there very well could be. And stop and search in London and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it may be a very big problem, and I'm very open to the idea that it might be. So I'm not close to it at all. But the solution is not let's have a load of quotas and things like that. The solution is the forgiveness and reconciliation that is won for us through the cross. That's
Yep.
the answer. It's forgiveness.
Yep.
We have to repent and forgive and be forgiven and be reconciled. The classic passage for me is in Ephesians chapter 2. The hostile groups, Jew and Gentile, have been made one new man in Christ through the cross. This is what reconciles people, not legislation and bureaucracy and virtue signaling and all this rubbish. The gospel transforms people and transforms community. And this is what's so ironic about this, because this is a betrayal of what Martin Luther King was about, who's a Baptist minister, and you can read his sermons are so powerful. Obviously you have the famous speeches and everything, but read the I think he's got a collection of sermons. I think it might be called The Power of Love. I can't remember what it's called. It's published by Penguin Classics. But honestly, they're some of the most powerful and moving sermons I've ever read. And it just underlines how deeply, deeply Christian the civil rights movement was, and how it would have been impossible without a vision of the gospel. It just would have been impossible. It would not have happened. And this is completely different. And how ironic is it that the church is so enthusiastically embracing it?
Yeah, you're right, Jamie. I mean, I'm not going to say that the Spirit can't work through committee and and report, but generally speaking, it works in the hearts of believers, transforming them from glory to glory as we reach our goal in Jesus Christ, as we run that race, and aiding people along that path. Aiding people along that path is the role of the church, and it is the only thing that's going to sort this world out.
Amen. Amen. Tom, we should probably do email of the week, because we're running out of time here. So this is actually a very moving email. I'm just going to say it's by Kay, because I don't know if he wants me to read out his name. So he addresses it all and he says, "Just a quick note. I stumbled across your podcast just after my mother passed away last October. She was a devout Baptist. She never forced any faith on me, as she believed that the love of God will find you when you're ready. I live some distance from my mum's town, so I spoke to her nearly every day on the phone during 2020 before her passing. We often would become theologians talking about religion, psychology, and faith, something we did when I was a teenager. She gave me courage to look deeper at everything. Unfortunately, her underlying conditions forced her to shield for months. In fact, due to a bout of pneumonia before lockdown 1, she was isolated from her charity shop/cafe runs for 9 months. Her vitality for life was sucked away. I know that she is not the person who left our world this way, and it's that truly breaks my heart. I was fortunate that Aberdeen Royal Infirmary allowed me to be in her room without a mask to the end. I will be forever grateful for that. We spoke up to the end. I said the Lord's Prayer for her when she took her last sleep. I spent a lot of time with her pastor. His kindness and love was something to behold, something you fellas give in spades. Ironically, I've never practiced religion as such, but found solace in churches and the communities attached, a sense of safety when in holy presence. Dealing with my mother's affairs, there was only one item I took for a keepsake, and that was the Bible she had been awarded at her Sunday school at age 14. It found me. My Friday mornings are grounded with your balance and truth. I spent a lot of time in my own company. Lockdown helped me realize that I didn't really have a big social circle. When listening to you lads banter about biscuit and rage about the injustice of authoritarianism, I can imagine my mother being right there with you. She loved a good rant about all this bollocks. Your courage to speak out, even against your own church, shows true conviction and faith and love in God. We worship where we stand. If it's besides gents of your caliber, then my faith in humanity will never waver, because you remind me we all hold God's love. Thank you, my Friday sanctuary. Peace and blessings." Well, I just so deeply moved reading that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kay, for emailing in with that beautiful story. And we're so sad to hear about your mother and the way that the lockdown had such a terrible effect on her. And wonderful that we were able to be with her in her last moments in that way. And that reminds me of the kindness that the doctors and nurses showed when I was with my grandmother when she died. They allowed us all to be in the room with her, and we weren't forced to wear masks or anything like that. And it reminds you that there are, real humans working in these hospitals who don't want to do these horrible, inhumane things to people. And so we're thankful for that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a privilege to hear that, and I hope our Bible brings you solace and hope, and even joy as you journey through this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful note to finish on. So let's just finish with a couple of notices then. Just to say that if you'd like to get in touch and send an email, send it to irreverendpod@gmail.com, and also check out our sermon audio. I think Daniel's going to upload something this week for our sermon of the week, and that's at irreverendsermonaudio.buzzsprout.com. So we just shove some sermons up there once a week. So if you want to hear some of our sermons, they're up there, irreverendsermonaudio.buzzsprout.com. So that's all up there as well. And again, if you want to join our Patreon community, patreon.com/irreverends. And that's about it from my end. Tom, do you have anything to add to finish off with?
Well, only other than, as always, if those of you who are inclined to pray, please do pray for us, pray for our mission, pray that we can reach people, pray for this world and this country, and that would be, but especially that we can continue to minister to you, and bless you all, every one of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Put your faith in Christ. He is our only hope, and we do appreciate your prayers. All right, Tom, really enjoyed speaking to you as always, and I know it's good when we have guests and everything, but I think there is something special when it's just the two of us, just the founders of the podcast. I enjoy being able to go into depth with you.
Yeah, and me too, Jamie. God bless you, and see you next week.
All right, God bless. Bye now.